Hi, it's Christine with Moonshine Safari and
Anthony.
And we are up to Chapter 6 in the Outlander books. And just as a reminder, we have spoilers for both the show and the books. And so if you don't want to be spoiled, don't listen.
No spoils.
No spoils. Okay, so Chapter 6 opens. In Chapter 5, it was mostly dedicated to Claire's discussion with Colin for the first time. She had met Colin, and he had kind of been questioning her, and now that's over. And she's going to go have dinner in, I call it the Great Hall. I think she does call it the hall. I can't remember. For the first time with basically everyone from the castle. She is brought down to dinner, and everyone's sort of dressed very normal, not fancy dress. It's just a normal dinner. And some people are kind of staring at her, but mostly everyone's just going on about their business, eating. She's brought to the front table where Colin sits, and he introduces her to his wife, Letitia, I think it is. His son Hamish. And so this is kind of a variance between the shows and the books, where in the shows, Claire kind of makes a blunder and thinks that Hamish is Dual's son. That doesn't happen in the books. Colin introduces her right off the bat to Hamish and says, "This is my son Hamish, this is my wife." He wants her to sit with him. She does notice that Hamish looks like one of the Mackenzies. Basically, he's got the red hair, and she makes a comment in the book that he could look like Dougal's son, which becomes important. Spoiler. Dougal's daughters are also there. Dougal's daughters is another difference from the show. Dougal's daughters do not appear in the show, really. Dougal's daughters are there at the dinner when Claire gets there. So they're having herring for dinner, which just isn't Claire's thing, but she does go to eat. Hamish is offended right off the bat. Claire has forgotten to say grace. Basically thinks she's a full-on heathen and doesn't understand why she doesn't say grace. And so she asks him if he wants to say it. Colin gives him the okay, and he has this little limerick thing. It's pretty cute. Everyone's satisfied now. As they're eating, Claire asks how Mr. McTavish is doing, meaning Jamie. Again, no one knows who that is because that's not his real name. Letitia, Colin's wife, says, "Well, Mr. McTavish," and he was like, "Jamie." And she goes, "Oh, what's wrong with him?" And Claire says that, he was wounded or whatever. And they kind of have a little exchange that's very close to what happens in the show, where Colin says, asks Dougal, where'd you send him? And Dougal says, "Well, I sent him down to kind of tend to the horses." But I find what's interesting, that Colin asks Dougal, "Well, do you trust him?" You can tell, first of all, there is a little bit of tension between Dougal and Colin as far as Colin needs to make sure that Dougal is following his orders and falling in line as far as Colin is the one in charge. Also, it's not as obvious that Jamie necessarily completely fits in at this point with his kinsman. Anyway, all done. They eat. There's nothing else that's really strange. And Colin says, "Hey, I'm going to send someone to pick you up in the morning for Hall." And she doesn't really know what that is, but fine. She's kind of going with the flow at this point. The Claire in the books is different than the Claire in the show, in the sense that Claire in the books is less apt to just spout off. She kind of is quiet. She is absorbing more, and she doesn't really say as much, which, my opinion, is a better way to be if you're thrown into a situation.
Yeah, in the story, she takes offense to just about everything, and she's defensive.
Yes,
about everything,
correct.
Because it's not her time.
Right, and this doesn't make sense to her. But in the books, she seems to understand that she doesn't understand this and quiet about it, which is, okay, I think what I identify with that for me, that's how I would be. I probably wouldn't say jack to anybody.
If you were in a place that you don't know anything about, why would you draw attention to yourself in such a way?
Just listen. Right, exactly. Because you have no idea what's happening at this point. I still don't even think in reality you could have even taken in the fact that you have moved backwards in time. That would not.
Well, it's funny because in the story, it's like within the second episode, she just like walking around town dressed like them, carrying a basket, just like
she belongs.
The hell with my husband, because I don't, whatever he is doing or wherever he's at. I mean, I guess she's already resolved that he's not born yet. So if he's not born, then because she's already making googly eyes at Jamie already. So I guess technically, if he's not born, it's not cheating, but
she wants to get back.
She's a cheating, nasty woman. She already's looking at, I'm just saying in the show, Claire's already flirting and making, and
she doesn't think that she's flirting. She doesn't say that she's, cracks me.
You can see with your eyes.
Yeah. I still think that it's only been a couple of days that she's been there. I feel like your brain would still be going, okay, when am I going to wake up? This is ridiculous. This cannot be happening. So in the morning, back bright and early, Mrs. Fitz is back. She has more clothes, like fancier clothes. And she actually brings some old school 1700s era cosmetics for Claire. So she's getting all fancied up. And they get to the Great Hall and everybody else is also dressed.
They're gonna skip when she takes her clothes off and Miss Fitzgibbons is looking at her bra and stuff and she's looking at it. She has no idea what the hell she's wearing. And she's like, oh my God. She's almost like offended about it. And she goes, Claire has to come up with an excuse saying it's French.
Well,
and then she's like, oh.
Right. What's funny is that's in the show. That doesn't really happen.
That's in the show?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about shows.
But, right.
So, yeah.
Yes, we're doing what we are.
It's
about.
pretty funny.
Yeah, it is funny. Claire goes, well, we're Americanized. We just say bra. But in the show, she says brassiere.
She says a brassiere or something.
Claire's like, Miss
well,
Bates is like, all right, whatever.
Oh, it's the French? Oh, okay. That makes sense.
That makes sense, you big hoe. Wouldn't that make you more? Anyway. Okay. So they get down to the hall. Everyone is dressed well, and it's very formal. There's a scribe in the corner, which we will meet later, and he's writing everything down, and there's just this big man, and they haven't really said what his name is, but he's like kind of like the guy that's the enforcer of the group. The pipes are played as Colum and Dougal enter, and Dougal is lockstep behind Colum. So it's clear who the authority figure is right now. I mean, we definitely are going to find out more about the structure later, but at this point it is clear Colum is in charge. Dougal is like sort of the right hand. So they're going through these people bringing their grievances or whatever it is to Colum, because he's the laird, so he's in charge. And they're speaking in Gaelic for the most part, so Claire doesn't have any clue what's going on. Mrs. Fitz is there, and she's kind of telling him, okay, here's what they said, here's what's happening. And it sounds so angry to Claire that she thinks that they must start like killing each other soon. And then Colum makes a comment, they start laughing, and they're shaking hands by the time it's over, and everyone's fine. Fifth on the roster is Claire, so she's high enough on the roster to know that her presentation to the group is important. It's not, she wasn't first, but she's up there. So Dougal kind of gets up and he says, this is, Claire Beecham, because she'll go in by her maiden name, and she was accosted, and we found her, and we're hoping that you'll let her stay here until she can be reunited with her English family. Dougal emphasizes English because he doesn't necessarily want everybody at the castle to get too friendly with her, and most of the Scottish Highlanders at this point are not super friendly towards the English. So he wants everybody to know. He could have said French, especially with her last name. They made a big deal about the fact that they don't say Beauchamp. He could have said French, but he didn't say French. He said English on purpose. He's trying to make that separation clear.
Now, this is where she keeps drinking, right?
No.
This is not the time yet.
No. Not yet. They kind of mesh a lot of this together with some of the stuff that happens in the book at different times. So anyway, Colum accepts Claire to be there for the time being. They don't really say a time on it. He just says, yes, you're welcome to stay here and you're our guest. After Claire, a man brings a young girl up. Mrs. Fitz explains that the girl being brought before the court for loose behavior and not for following her father's advice on consorting with other men. Colum approves of the punishment, and all of a sudden, from somewhere back in the hall, Claire hears a Gaelic voice that she recognizes as Jamie saying something in Gaelic. She doesn't know what he's saying, but then everybody starts to talk, and Mrs. Fitz explains that Jamie has offered to take the punishment of the girl. Claire's offended because she said, well, Jamie's been injured. Why should he be doing this? And there's a debate going back and forth whether or not Jamie can even take the punishment, because Mrs. Fitz explains that it has to be someone from the clan, and Claire's surprised because she's been assuming this whole time that Jamie is part of the Mackenzie clan. And I think it's funny. I point this out in my brain because Mrs. Fitz goes, well, of course not. Did you see his tartan? It's different. Then Claire's like, oh, well, now I see it. Okay. Eventually, after some debate, they approve to let Jamie take the punishment. Only Jamie says he doesn't want to use the strap. He wants fists. Mrs. Fitzgibbons makes it clear that a man can choose fists instead of the strap, but a woman could not. So that's Jamie's right by being the fact. A man, he's going to take the fists. And so the big man comes forward, and he is carefully beaten. So they beat him where it hurts. It certainly injures him, but not detrimentally. They're not trying to kill him. They're not trying to damage him permanently. But so afterwards, Claire goes to treat him, and his eye is swollen, his lip is swollen, and he asks him why. He said he felt sorry for her, and she goes, yeah, but why you? And he goes, well, really, what's the difference? And so Mrs. Fitz actually comes to help, and she brings some leeches and some stuff to sort of wash out his mouth since his lip is cut and stuff like that. Claire at this point is disgusted by the idea of putting the leeches on. She got modern medicine techniques in her, and that didn't include leeches, but Mrs. Fitz knows old school methods, and she puts the leeches on his eye, around his eye, to try to bring down the swelling. And she explains kind of to Claire, this is important for later, explains how the leeches work, and some people don't know how to use them right, and etc. So Claire's actually kind of drinking this in, although the leeches are gross to her, which kind of
Stand by me. Remember that?
Right. But you know, at the same time, they used him for a purpose. It's kind of a cool idea. But,
they still do.
And she has him rinse out his mouth and make sure he cleanses it and stuff like that. And by the end, the swelling is definitely down. She's like, he's not going to be pretty tomorrow, but he's going to be able to see out of his eye, which is an improvement. She also explains that the girl, and they call her Lyra, the spelling in the book is, I would never have said Lyra if I saw the spelling in the book. It's insane.
Laoghaire.
Yeah, it's, I think in the very beginning when I was first reading it, I was like, oh, Lago hair. I mean, I'm like,
Laoghaire.
yeah, but they say Lyra.
Okay. There.
Lyra is her granddaughter, and so she's really grateful.
Scottish must be why we have all the silent G's and H's and crap, because that's what's in there.
Well, and I never hear them say it different, so it's not like they say, they go, oh, well, in the
It's probably how they do it in the back of their throat. They're probably like,
yeah.
Lyra.
She says thank you for her granddaughter, but she said she better come and, you know, if she has any manners, she'll come and thank herself. And when they're finishing their conversation, Lyra does show up to thank Jamie. Claire kind of wonders if maybe Jamie's interest isn't just purely to help the girl. She is supposed to be very pretty. So
in the story, well, I don't think she's all that cute. She looks a little pretty.
I mean, she wouldn't necessarily be somebody I would think is real pretty either in the book, in the show, but
they can't make anybody look better than Claire.
That's true. That's true. Claire tells Jamie that his bandages need to come off tomorrow, that, you know, hopefully she'll see him and she'll take them off. And Jamie says, thank you. The next day is sort of a regular breakfast. Looking around, she asks about Jamie, and Mrs. Fitz sends a boy to get him. Jamie just sends a word back, and he's like, no, I'm fine. I'm not coming back right now. Mrs. Fitz goes, hey, you know what'll get him? Take him some food for lunch, and I'll get you a basket. When lunchtime comes around, you can take him some bandages off. So she uses the morning in Mrs. Fitz's herb garden, which she really likes. She likes the gardening thing. She likes gathering the herbs. And to run a castle like that with that many people, the food production's got to be constant. You are not just, you know, ordering out for Scottish DoorDash. You've got to be able to make your food. You've got to keep it going. People are always eating. People are always needing to bring more food, etc. So that's a big production. Mrs. Fitz is supposed to be like awesome as far as her running the business, running the castle, I should say. So the boy takes her to the horse paddock at lunch, and this is kind of very close to how it shows in the show. She's kind of walking up to the horse stall, and she surprises the horse, who kind of rears back, and Jamie's a little annoyed until he sees that it's her, and then he relaxes. She brings in the food, and they have lunch together, and she sees that Mrs. Fitz is actually really smart because he calms down eating. He's definitely, and he tells her that he's had to survive on grass before, and she's like, First she thinks he's joking. When, oh, you know, like last winter, we were kind of living rough and there's no game. We couldn't find anything, and I tried to eat grass. So he says it definitely gave him a lot of gas, but it's just a silly conversation, nothing important, super. But they have a nice talk, and she leaves without forgetting to fix his shoulder or take the bandages off. And this is still solidly in episode 2 for the show. I actually read the chapter.
Which is shocking because every time she gets to him, she got to take his shirt off.
He usually does somehow get his shirt off,
and
then use her finger. See, okay.
Then she just like touching it, like
touching the scar.
Like, who's it? What? Anyway, like she clearly does it. So Frank is long forgotten by now. It's the second episode.
She's still trying to get back to Frank.
Who's Frank?
She's still trying to get back to the stone.
Who's Frank? Frank who?
Frank
who?
Her husband.
Or Frank.
Still in episode 2. We will kind of go over that entire episode once we get through chapters to get there, but we are done with chapter 6. Hope you're enjoying it. Check out moonshinesafari.com for some of our Outlander and other themed merchandise, not kind of funny shirts and stuff like that. You should check it out. We got some cool stuff. And let us know what we're missing other than Claire's show and Claire book. Okay, I hope you guys are having a great week, and we will see you next week.
Ciao.
Bye.
Yeah, you're wrong, by the way. No, I was right. They plied her with whiskey before all of that happened. You're wrong. It didn't happen later. It happened
she didn't
before.
make any mistakes. She wasn't worried about how much she drank or anything.
That wasn't my point. My point was that was when she's walking through and she says, Frank told me that, you know, she talked about interrogation, the process of interrogation, which I think is a clue to him being who he is. How would he know about interrogation stuff? But he told her about the interrogation stuff when she was drinking all that whiskey.
Oh, good. Okay, good. No, I'm glad.
I'm not doing it now.
No, what? Why are you doing it out?
You shut me down. You did. You told me I was wrong. No, I wasn't wrong.
Yeah, but then you proved me
No.
wrong. That's good.
I'm not doing it.